Sometimes my face isn't, and my deep thought face might look
Sixth
like
grader
I'm not
face.
happy, but it's I'm thinking.
My husband told me that the other day.
Yeah.
He was explaining to my son, he goes, you know when your mother and your grandmother have this look
Ray.
I hope you enjoyed your lunch and welcome back. And so we're going to jump on down into our agenda. Commissioner Laker, would you get us started? Okay.
So we're gonna jump down to talk about some of the subcommittee updates. We've hit a little bit on some of the things that we've been working out. But again, a quick brief, the we've had 3 focuses that we felt like we could manage. And we've worked out the logistics of 2 courses on Canvas. One is for commissioners, one will be for advisors. And we actually started putting stuff in yesterday. And the other thing was something that we were gonna ask, the logistics of asking the publishers to do something, and I'll get into that after this part. I'm gonna read where it's in the invitation. We did add an expectation to the publishers, of how they needed to hopefully support us in navigating the digital aspect of their submissions. And so those are the three areas that we are focusing on. And so if you look up, you will see Commissioner Seiss and Commissioner Jimenez have been working on the textbook commissioners Canvas course. And once they've completed it and it's live, then the commission members would have access to, it is a DPI Canvas course. It's on the DPI's platform for Canvas. So Commissioners Jimenez and Seiss.
Yeah. All right. Hello. I'm Commissioner Seiss. Commissioner Jimenez and I started, this will be our first, well, I guess we finished one full year. And just reflecting back at the end of last year in October, all the things we wish we would have known. So we started talking to Commissioner Linker about just kind of doing a little bit more training with commissioners. It's a very fun process, but if you don't know what you're getting into, it can oftentimes be a very overwhelming process. So I hope and I think that Commissioner Jimenez and I have kind of put together this really nice little platform to take that overwhelming piece out of it and just really streamline it for you guys. So if you look at what we've got there, so we've got our title page, which just basically introduces you to the textbook commission evaluation training. And then you've got 4 buttons across the bottom that we felt were the most important things we wish somebody, and it's not that nobody told us, it's just you don't know until you know one of those things. Mm-hmm. So the very first one we'll start with was essential information. A lot of these things you guys already have in your Google Forms, but we just reposted some things that were hopefully that we felt were very important that you needed to have direct access to. Attendance policy, which we've reiterated a couple times. Okay, so your operations manual, and each one of these little toggles will link you either to the PDF itself, or it will link you to the website where you can get the information that you need. So operations manual, which you guys already have in your folder. State board policy, we picked out the policies that are very specific to the commission. We reposted our schedule there, and then we reposted our attendance policy. Okay, digital systems was another piece. So you can see this page looks a little bit different. You don't have any extra buttons that you need to press. You actually just have things that we wish we would have known. So we know that we will be here for 4 meetings total, meeting number 1 being today, and then you'll have an evaluation week that we work pretty tirelessly. It's a very, very long week, but it's also a lot of fun. You learn a lot of stuff. And we'll get into like the breakdown of that week, like things that you can expect before, during, and after. But this is just to know like things that you're going to be trained on, things that we're going to have to know before we even get the books in our house. So there'll be a video that we'll add to walk you through it. We've got best practices if the event, which I know that Dr. Moody had talked earlier, in the event that there's an emergency and you absolutely cannot make it to Raleigh, then you may have that option to attend virtually. And there are some logistics there of how to enter a virtual meeting, you know, what the rules are as far as how you conduct yourself during a virtual meeting, everything that you would need to know.
I don't mean to interrupt
No,
you.
you're
I'm
fine.
just so impressed that y'all put all this together. How kind to think about other people going through
No
the
problem.
experience.
Okay, so then toggle number 3, this is evaluation week. And I think as new commissioners, this was the one that we were most concerned about because there's so many things that you have to know. So we broke it down into 3 things. What we would want you guys to know before you even get into that process. And we talk about, you know, what happens when the books start coming to your house. Where do you put them? How do you have access to them? We even went through kind of like our best practices on doing inventory because inventory is brutal. And just kind of gave some suggestions. You know, Commissioner Jimenez did it completely different than I did, but we both obviously had the same end result. So just not telling you how to do it, but just making suggestions as a new commissioner, what might work best for you, just to take some of that stress and some of that almost like overwhelming fear when you have 500 boxes in your garage and you don't even know where to begin.
Commissioner Jimenez, and I will say, like, all of these things are things we talk about in these meetings, but when you leave and you go home, like, it's just another place for you to have access. Like, okay, maybe I didn't remember what one of the suggestions was. This is a place that I can go and look at.
Okay. So we talk about what's going to happen during evaluation week, and during evaluation week, I mean, really, that's probably the easiest part because you're going to be in a room full of other commissioners and you're going to have so many people there to talk to and bounce ideas off. But what Commissioner Jimenez, myself, and Commissioner Browning did this last year was during that week, in that room that you're in, it at times can get very, I don't want to say crazy, but there's a lot of different things going on. And we actually came up with some spreadsheets that we did just for ourselves that when hindsight, everybody could have benefited. So we went ahead and we actually just uploaded some pictures of the spreadsheets that we had used to keep ourselves super organized in that room because it is a lot that's going on. And you as commissioners, you're in charge of making sure that every book gets checked by, a minimum of 3 people. And that was the thing that we were just kind of, it only took us, I think, after the first day, we said we have to do something better. So we went ahead and posted our documents for you guys. And again, it's just a suggestion. It's just examples of how we did it. We gave you some troubleshooting because when you're in that room, you not only have virtual resources, but you also have paper resources. So we gave some tips on how to troubleshoot in case an advisor comes up to you and their computer won't work. You don't necessarily have to go get somebody in the digital technology department. We will be able to do that for you. That's part of our job. The next piece would be within that week when we go into the debriefing room with all of the teachers. Our middle school room had already set up a Google Doc where we could simultaneously put our notes on it all at the same time so we could see and we made sure we captured everything because these are the notes that you're going to have to take with you into debriefing, and this is what's going to determine the vote, yay or nay. So it's just a really nice way to get everything organized so that come those 2 debriefing days when all of your reports are due, you essentially have 75% of it due and you literally just have to click submit. So that was one thing that we did not know going in. I know a bunch of us had to stay after that day because our reports were due by 4:00. So we were there for 2 hours, cutting and pacing as quick as possible. This will walk you through when to do it, how to do it, where to submit it. Okay, and then the last one, when it pops up, it'll be after evaluation week, and that will get into deliberations and then what you do with the information that you've collected. Where do you put it? Where do you upload it? How and when you can submit it, because some things cannot be submitted until we meet back in August. And there will be some links in there that'll kind of just show you where everything needs to go. And then the last button will be our deliberations and reconsiderations. So that's the meeting that we meet back in August for 2 days. And again, it just walks you through what reports are mandatory, how you do your reports. And I know that one of our things was where does the information come from? And it tells you like everything that you've collected in evaluations week, what document you created where you can just cut and paste and where you put it. So that to us were the things that we felt as brand new commissioners would have been awesome to know beforehand. And we just wanted to make sure that new commissioners coming in had the ability to see these things so that it just took off the edge a little bit. Because once we get moving in July, it goes really fast. So we just want to make sure you guys were well equipped.
Does anybody have any questions?
Commissioner Perry, where did you go? How did you get to that?
It's in, go ahead.
Yeah, Commissioner Jimenez. So it's in Canvas, but we haven't published it yet
Oh, okay.
for like everyone to have access. We're still fine tweaking it. We're still adding some links, but hopefully by March it'll be like everybody can have access to it.
Thank you. It's a
And-
great job.
Yeah, thank you. It will be something, as a new commissioner, you will be required to go through and look at it, and there'll be like a poll at the end, just so that we know that you guys have had the time to go through it. And it's not going to be anything humongous. It just might be like, what does it mean to deliberate? Like something very simple, just so that the commissioners, like we know that you guys have what you need. And then at that time, if there's any more questions, we have plenty of time to go through it with you and say, okay, let's go into a little bit more detail.
This Commissioner Linker, also things will be added to it. So like when we start getting into the logistics of the advisors, the information commissioners need for advisors, it could be a separate button. We just started with what we felt like we could manage and do well before we add to. There is This is the Canvas course that, we also created for the textbook advisors, and this is just the opening page. It's gonna be set up a little differently because whereas the commission is more just information and a place to house different suggestions and information, the advisors Canvas course will be shared with the advisors when they're selected, and there will be things that they will need to do, like assignments and quizzes that they have to go through in order to get the CEUs and be able to come to the evaluation site and evaluate, and to get some of that stuff front-loaded so we don't spend as much time in the evaluation week at the beginning giving them as much of the training, if that makes sense. So, but that's the other Canvas course. Do you have any questions about that? As commissioners, we don't traditionally do a lot with the advisors training, because Dr. Fair handles that. We select the advisors, and then she handles the logistics behind the scenes of training and all the documentations and paperwork that they might need. And this year they are possibly gonna have to go through e-procurement, which we have in the past. So if we do, we'll add some stuff for that as well. And our role in that would be that they might need us to help answer questions. So if I'm the commissioner and and these advisors in my district, then I'm a person they can call and ask for help if they have a problem with something. That's part of my role as the commissioner. Yes.
I would just add, this is Carmela here, I would just add too that what we've done in the past, it's been a few years since advisors have had to go through that. But what I've done in the past is have a webinar and have staff from e-procurement to come and actually go through the process with them and actually troubleshoot if they're having problems getting in and signed up. Do that kind of right on the spot. And then I think that has alleviated some of the questions and problems that people have had. That's something that I'll have to work on to maintain contact with our business office here and then find out what the steps are if they've changed or anything like that. But what I could do for you all, last year I shared with you the advisor's manual, which is what I think Commissioner Sison and Hernandez were looking at Commissioner Linker and Commissioner Flowers were looking at for some of the advisor's information for that particular course. But if that's developed still again just as a reference point, I can still share that with you. That information would either be within that or in addition to that. So I can share information with you as much as you all like, depending on how much you want to help or if you want to refer people back to me. So when we get to that point, we'll bring it back up and discuss it and see what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And then we'll talk about what potential opportunities they've had for training and webinars and stuff like that and see if still feel there's a need for any more than that.
And I will say that the Canvas course is their training that they've had to do on their own. Dr. Fair will still have a webinar like she always does, ask questions. They'll get the Canvas course before the webinar, and so that they've had a chance to complete it, so that if they have any questions, they'll have Dr. Fair there at the webinar and then know how to reach her after that fact. So we're not replacing the webinar, we're just taking what was a packet and making it digitally accessible and a way to house their forms and documents and things that they need to submit to Dr. Fair. And so the last briefing for the committee is we had at the last meeting at the end, we were talking about some troubleshooting, some issues, and one of the problems we had was knowing how to navigate the publisher's digital materials, and that we felt that we needed more support or access to a document or a way to help us navigate their material, because if we can't find where it is, it's hard to say it meets the criteria. And so based on that, there is a change in the invitation, and so if you are interested in looking at the invitation, it's on page 4, and no, it's on page 5, it's number 6. And so what is new is that the publisher if they're submitting technology-based programs or any other non-print material, They must provide specific instructions on how to navigate all submitted digital materials through the online platform. Navigation instructions may be provided by a video or screencast, no longer than 10 minutes in length, and or an electronic document, although we do prefer the video or the screencast. A link for the access to the video or screencast instructions and or electronic document within the navigation instructions must be submitted as part of the bid process. And then once we have that, it will also be uploaded into our Canvas course. And we would therefore have that added instruction support before we actually get our materials. And so that is something that we've worked through and got through all the eyes that needed to see it for approval to put in the invitation for this coming year. So hopefully that'll alleviate some of the issues that we've had in the last couple of years as the digital platforms become a little more complicated, and then everyone has their own way to navigate. Each publisher is different. So that was our 3 things that we're working on. That one's been resolved, hopefully. The other 2 with the Canvas courses are still a work in progress. And at this time, before we, the whole purpose of the subcommittees was to make it easier for not just new commissioners, but existing commissioners, so that everyone's on the same page and that everyone has the same information. Even if we're not in the same rooms in evaluation week, it's all the same overall sort of system in place. And so I know I had asked Commissioner Autry, she's in her 2nd year on the commission, also to share some suggestions or some things that she saw, and some things that we talked about in our meeting in October as well. So in addition to what we've already kind of talked about, Commissioner Autry.
Yeah, Commissioner Autry, I think a lot has already been covered. The overview was really helpful. The things that the commissioners did in Canvas was extremely helpful. One of the biggest things too that I just want to emphasize is the importance of being here for the first part of evaluation week, when the publishers are coming in and we're checking in materials, we're looking at what they've brought, what goes together, what the bids are, because that's your opportunity to kind of understand what they're bringing to the table, understand what pieces go with which bids, because a lot of the week you're going to spend time facilitating that with the advisors. They're going to have questions about which materials go with which bids. Is this included? Is this not included? Where do I find this? Where do I find the books? And so that time for us as commissioners, because we get to actually talk with the publishers and ask those questions as we're checking them in, is so valuable so that we understand that and it's a little more clear for them. A lot of confusion happened in the past 2 years from the advisors not understanding which bids went with which materials. So just being here to understand that is a huge piece of the puzzle for that week. And then 2, choosing advisors that are going to be able to dig into the materials, that are going to be knowledgeable of the content curriculum. You do, I think, feel like I do, as a commissioner, I feel more comfortable if I know some of the advisors, if I have had a say-so. So it's really important that everybody contribute, every district contribute people from your area that you know are going to give you accurate, valuable feedback. They do need to know curriculum. They do need to know what they're looking for and be relevant in the classroom, that they are a current teacher that knows their stuff, essentially, and can give you that feedback. So,
Does anyone have any questions or anything I could add? Any other commissioners? The other thing I would encourage, and if we have time, we might, is waiting for Mr. Snyder, go ahead and talk about what we talk about materials that we're getting. So I mentioned earlier, we get everything that's submitted. We will get it, usually, it's in the bid proposal and everything's approved. I think we'll get it by June the 1st. Usually it's the first week in June. We've talked about working on getting it earlier. That's not something we can do with the timeline this year, but hopefully next year. As soon as we get the material, it behooves us to check it in. There's a timeline. Dr. Fair needs to know what's not included. They have, if there is digital components, they provide in their materials access through codes or however they choose to share most of them choose to give you a password access. You're not allowed as commissioner to go in and make an account and put in your personal information because they shouldn't be communicating with you personally. That's part of that blackout we were talking about earlier. But that time between the time that your materials come and the time that we have evaluation week is your time to dig into it. And I really encourage people to dig into that digital piece. And if you have problems navigating it, by then we will have their digital webcast of how to navigate. If you have problems and questions when we're checking them in, we need to make sure that they show us as we check them in. Yes, we did give you this, and here's how you, but here, if you couldn't find it, let me show you how you navigate through it before they leave. And that will also help troubleshoot some of those kinds of issues. But it is on us to know when we come in there what we've tried it, and it does or doesn't work, or we can or can't navigate. So then we can ask one last time, you know, can you show me how to get to that? That's part of checking in. Does it work? You've given me this link that tells me how to get here. We're gonna check and make sure it works here on site, because if it doesn't, then that's a problem. So that kind of sums up the work that we've been on to fine tune. And I think with that, for everyone who doesn't know, Mr. Snyder, Eric just joined us, and he is the attorney that represents, you'll have to explain all that.
Oh, yes.
He's a general counsel to the State Board of Education, so he works for all of us. And welcome.
All right, thank you all. Very happy to be here today. First, on behalf of the State Board, thank you for doing this important work. It is a long Friday that you're doing here, and you're at the beginning of this very important project. The board appreciates that work, and I want to share that sentiment with you. This is, as I said, it's very important for our classroom students. It's important for teachers, and the board takes the textbook adoption and review process very seriously, and it couldn't happen without you. So first, thank you. So my name's Eric Snyder. I'm in the State Board office. I represent the board. I also provide legal advice to those throughout the agency and advisory bodies that assist the board in DPI, including the Textbook Commission and others. For your purposes on this endeavor, I am your lawyer. So if you have questions, please, I will pass around my cards here at the end of the day. So if you've got questions that come up, please feel free to reach out to me or coordinate with your leadership if you've got a particular question. You've got an experienced team here that can help guide you through this process, but it's one where, you know, I don't want this to be no good deed unpunished, right? We just want to keep you safe and feeling comfortable in this work. I will tell you, we have not had a number of ethics questions come up, thankfully. I wish I could say that's because of the great counsel I gave you, but I think it's more of the fact that this is a pretty well-insulated group. We've got a good process here where we try to keep advisors sort of out of the muck of those issues. But in any event, there are some important pieces I'd like to share with you today about state board policy, about this state role you have, and some of the unique pieces of textbook adoptions related to procurement, as well as the public records we have. So we've got a short agenda. I'm going to talk briefly about public records today. This is not going to be anything you're going to fall out of your seat over. These things you probably know, but good for us to cover. Also, I want to talk a little bit about some ethics provisions that I think are probably second nature to you already, but just important for us to level set here at the beginning some of the expectations that the board and the department have for their advisories. Again, we are checking our boxes here and making sure everyone's on the same page with these things. This is not a finger point to anyone here in this group. So we'll take it away here. Public records. So public records can be just about anything, right? So it doesn't matter what sort of the tangible nature of the record is, whether it's paper, a photograph, a book, a binder, an email, all of those things, regardless of physical form, that are made or received in connection with the public's business. Y'all are doing the public's business. So if you get a record, whatever physical form it's in or whatever soft copy form it's in, it's most likely going to be a public record. So that's going to be policies, directives, any sorts of papers you receive, communications and the like, our meeting agendas, for example, for these kinds of meetings, any messages that you might exchange with your fellow advisors or DPI staff. Y'all are familiar with that context already. I will share with you, just because you send it via text message to your friend who's on the committee, if it's in connection with this, that's going to be a public record. The email that you send, not from your school address, but from your, from Gmail to Gmail, or from Hotmail to Yahoo for some of our more established advisor members. If it's a personal email account, but it's about public business, doesn't matter where it sits. If it's public business, it's going to be a public record. So that's an important reminder. You don't get out of public records by sending a text instead, or a photo of what you wrote down instead of typing out of an email. People forget this, and I'll just share, you all are people of discretion and smarts and will pick up the phone when you need to. But email, as you've heard from countless others, E is for eternity. It lives forever. Someone will find it. I know you all already do good email etiquette and message etiquette, but just a reminder here that those are good practices. You should do them in this context too. What's not a public record? So there are some exceptions, right? So if you and I have a communication that's a privileged communication, that's not going to fall in that producible public record exception right away. I mean, it could eventually become something that becomes public, but it's going to be sort of taken out of that context for some time. These are also identified in statute. You're not going to come across settlement documents or tax records. You may come across some trade secrets if some publishers mark their documents accordingly. That might be something we've seen. I don't know, have we seen that, Carmela?
I don't think so.
Well, there's a first time for everything. Someone may stamp something trade secret. If they do, it'll be an exciting thing because the commission hasn't seen that before, but not something particular to worry about. But all this to say, there are particular exceptions outlined to this public record statute. And you all are familiar with these from schools, right? Just to sort of round out the context. So special ed records, student records, personal information and the like, those are not going to be public records. Again, you're not going to see that here. So who can access these things? Well, anyone in the public. They don't have to tell you why they're interested in it. So, after the fact, we may have some publishers interested in what this process looks like. You may have heard there is great interest in our standards here in North Carolina. People may be interested in communications after the fact among advisors to the textbook commission, communications with the agency. We don't get to ask why. We're doing the public's work, so they can have whatever motive they want when they request public records. So we'll make those available to them at reasonable times or under reasonable supervision if we invite folks in to review. More often, we'll just send them a PDF of what they've requested after we do a review to make sure that none of those other kinds of exceptions apply. So responding from the state board's perspective, we follow the law, reasonable time, reasonable manner. We're going to get them to you promptly when they come into the state board office. Reasonable depends on the circumstances. So how big is the request? Is it intermingled with personal notes that wouldn't be public record? We'll do that analysis. Should you get a request for public records in your capacity as advisor to the committee, forward that request in to Carmela. We'll pass that along to DPI's communications. If it's a request that comes into the state board office will take care of it.
Carl, I just think it's important just to slow down just 1 minute and just kind of punch this. We really don't get a lot of, well, I haven't really received a lot of emails or questions as a commissioner. But when you do, my recommendation to you is to not reply at all, just forward it to Carmela and let her reply. Just don't take that chance. You don't have to reply. You're not being rude or, we're very southernly. We always want to say, well, thank you for sending this. And I would just forward it, simply forward it.
I think Dr. Moody makes a great point. That some of the items that we're covering here today are not going to be items that are really going to intrude into the work that you're doing for this. And my guess, if an ethics issue comes up or a public records request comes up, you didn't sign up to deal with those things.
Yeah.
Pass them along to Carmela and let the agency address those. Forward them to your leadership if you have a particular question about the best way to engage with the agency on it. I have no doubt that you all are very capable, polite people who would like to be of assistance. Educators are the most helpful folks you'll find.
Yeah.
Here, you don't need to be helpful. Help us by letting Carmela know, or letting me know as your attorney. I don't expect this issue to come up, but in case it does, you will have heard it. So the state board, if it receives a request, or the communications department here will work with DPI staff to help track down these materials. It's not a process you're going to need to worry about. If something comes up and we need your involvement in one way, we're going to make it as easy as we can for you to help us out. But again, I don't expect it. So some considerations here. The agency doesn't charge fees for these things, for public records. Your districts may or may not. It has to be sort of outlined in rule if you do. Verbal information, kind of communication that you have with a colleague in connection with this. That verbal communication that's not a public record. It's not been memorialized in a piece. This tape recording will be, right? We'll take pains to review commingled records if somehow there's public or non-public records, and there's no obligation to create a record. We don't have to make a new piece of paper if it doesn't exist in order to respond to a public records request. It either exists or it doesn't. I won't bore you sort of with some of the legal aspects of this. State board takes very seriously public records requests, because if you don't follow the law on this, the courts can order you to release those records. There can be attorney's fees for those who have to bring forth the machinery of the courts in order to enforce these rights. And so that's an appropriate public policy decision that our legislature has made. Should the afternoon slot about ethics and public records have you riveted, as I can tell that you all are riveted by you being on the edge of your seats, I encourage you to go online and read more about it. There's some useful resources here. And there's some in print too. Before I move from this pretty basic, probably remote issue that might impact you, any questions on public records? Our good audience. The headline is, let me or Carmela know, and we'll help you out. Okay. General policies concerning ethics. Let's turn to this. This is probably a bit more important. All right. There are a number of policies that the state board has in its policy manual that apply not just to state board members, but also to people in the department and advisory boards. So you join the ranks of your colleagues on other standing state board committees, commissions, and councils. The state board has a conflict of interest policy that there are a lot of words, but there's some basic principles here. First, in your capacity as a textbook commission advisor, please follow the law and regulations. If you have a question about what the law requires of you in this capacity, give me a call. I'll help you with that question. I've never had anyone call me, but we live in interesting times. You might need to give me a call. At the end of the day, as part of your work, you do have an obligation to be loyal to the board and have that act as a fiduciary. So that means we're not looking for you to always agree with the board. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you have an obligation not to use this position to somehow advance your own self-interest. So, for example, if there was some harebrained scheme for you to have some sort of financial gain from this public service work, you can't do it. That would be a violation of the state board's conflict of interest policy. We're going to ask you to avoid any kinds of activities that would create a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest. So what would that potentially look like? That could be a publisher reaching out to you, trying to pick your brain, or send you flowers or send you an iPad or something like this. If something like that happens, where someone looks like they're trying to provide some sort of undue influence to you outside of the process, please let us know. We'll address that. I don't think we've had that issue come up recently. I can't think of not since I've been here, and I don't have any records in my office of that happening. But if it were to happen, we would deal with it. This is an interesting public policy issue concerning textbooks. We see that throughout the country in a number of different contexts. We've had conversations about textbooks adoptions here in the state boardroom about what's kind of appropriate content, what aligns with our standard, and what are good decisions to be made. Certainly those are discussions you should engage with and participate in to the extent they come up in this context. I don't know how they will, but they could. But again, these advisory committees to the board, like the board, are supposed to remain sort of nonpartisan in those kinds of discussions. If you believe there's a conflict of interest, like you might have one, talk to your chair about it, or if you become aware of another person who may have a conflict of interest issue, just raise that with Dr. Moody, or feel free to give me a call about that. So if there was a violation of this policy, it would mean that you could be dismissed from this duty. And that's true for our other advisory boards as well. All right, standard code of conduct. This is another board policy that's been promulgated. You can find it online. You can follow the link here. This is a rule of general applicability, again, for state board members, DPI staff, Charter School Advisory Board, Professional Educator Preparations and Standards Commission, Textbook Advisory, up and down the line. And the board, just like we have a high expectations for teachers here in North Carolina, which you're familiar with from the professional code of conduct that's in our administrative code, here in connection with this work, the board expects the highest standards of conduct and honesty to inspire confidence in this process. Again, that's not been an issue in this group ever before. So again, avoiding those circumstances that might create an appearance of a conflict of interest or an actual conflict of interest. Essentially, fostering the perception that this work is indeed in the best interest of children is what our board's conduct policy requires. All right, so there are some details in this policy. I put the fine print on the screen here, and you can find it on the board's website as well. Again, this is sort of getting to the idea of a quid pro quo, some exchange of some sort of benefit, whether it's a meal or a trip or some sort of present to procure influence over your vote or determination here. And so certainly this is applicable to publishers who are seeking to have their textbooks adopted. So if any of these publishers were to reach out to you or their agents, please let us know, and certainly don't accept the gift. Now, if you have a relationship with someone who's sort of in this sphere, who's involved in it, and you think it might be a little bit like maybe your cousin's having a birthday and they work for a publisher and they're in from out of town and they want to take you out to dinner, well, that's going to be okay. There's sort of exceptions that are reasonable here. If you have a sort of concern that comes up, let us know.
This is one of those areas where if you were to have an exception like that, would be extremely rare. But if you were, it's probably good just to let Dr. Fair know, like just say, hey, wanted somebody else to know, in case I'm seeing the dinner, this is, yeah.
And that's precisely what folks do here at the department if they know someone who's tangentially making a bid on a contract that's pending before the department. They'll say, hey, my neighbor's having a birthday party, and I know that their son works for XYZ, just letting you know. Then what we do is we send back an email that says, thank you for letting us know. You should go and enjoy the party. You should go and enjoy the dinner. Mm-hmm. I think probably the best way to think about this, and you're probably not going to remember these policies or their particular numbers, if it's something that sort of strikes you as someone might ask a question about this, or would I have to explain this? Help us give you cover for it. We are more than happy to do that quick analysis, say grace over it, and send you on your way so you can enjoy that time. Or if there is an issue, you've let us know and we can help you steer clear of any potholes. Again, I haven't had many of these come to us within the context of this board, but with respect to other boards of the agency, it happens all the time. So this is very par for the course. We appreciate that sunlight on it, and everyone can sort of go about their business. But if something sort of strikes you as, hey, do I need to explain this? Or I got a question about it? It's not pesky at all to report that into Dr. Fair or to me, and we'll sort of bless it and move it along, and it's really not a big deal. But it is a big deal if it's something sketchy and you're trying to work it around. So just put some sunlight on it, and we'll give you the blessing and allow you to move forward typically, or steer you in the right direction if it is something that could be perceived as a problem. All right, here's a couple more of these examples. I mean, again, the idea is you cannot accept something of value that's given to you in connection for this to sort of get your influence. All right, now within the textbook, well, let me pause here. Anything on those generally applicable board policies that we've covered? Imagine not. Within the context of the textbook commission, there are some additional policies I think really just underline this more specifically in this context. The state board has articulated particular policies with respect to textbook commission, and so those are what we expect our publishers to follow, and of course they should follow the 2020 invitation to submit, so forgive the 2019 here on the contact with publishers, but we expect our publishers to abide these rules. Again, we really are trying to avoid any sort of undue influence here. And forgive me, I should have updated the report here. Our rules are really long-standing with respect to this. But no one ought to be trying to influence you or attempt to influence your evaluation process. And these rules are backed up with if there's an issue with respect to undue influence, advisors can be removed from this committee. We haven't had to do that, but we can. And we have this comprehensive training here at the front end just to make sure everyone's on the same page with respect to these duties. Again, if there's questions about how you ought to act or proceed, Dr. Fair or I can help you with those questions. To avoid this, we do have a hard and fast rule that you ought not meet privately with any of the publishers. Of course, that's a rule that applies to them. It also applies to you. So if someone phones you out of the blue or sends you an email asking you to meet to talk about this process, and you don't know who they are, or they identify themselves as a publisher or in the industry, feel free to loop in Dr. Fair or I on those communications, and we can help ask those questions if you're having difficulty identifying who that person is, and if you have a concern that they may compromise your work here on this board.
The only time when this one has ever came into play for me personally was during the week of evaluations when the publishers are there and like you're on the elevator, and you're by yourself, or it's just an odd feeling. So I know we had a situation last year that I just asked a couple of, they just had a question, they weren't trying to coerce anything, but they just had a question. And so it was a matter of just being able to say, could you send your question to Dr. Fair, please? Because she's in the next room. Or let me get Dr. Fair to answer your question. As quickly as you can refer it and get out of it and still be polite. You don't have to be rude about it. But sometimes it's because I was afraid that if I answer a question, then the conversation continues. So just cut off the conversation.
I think that's a great point. So before doing this, I was a litigation attorney, and there are rules about you can't talk to the jury if you're the attorney, and it's a little from my context, it's a lot like that. And there really is that week is the that time when you all are together and publishers are present. you don't need to be rude to that person on the elevator or sort of in the lobby who you strike up a conversation with, on break while you both reach for the same muffin or Coca-Cola. If they do raise that question, what a great question. Why don't you and I walk over here to Dr. Fair and that way she can answer it? That's a really clean way. But that's the context when this might arise. You don't need to be rude or sort of do one of these numbers like when I pick up my kids at school. You don't have to do that, but you can redirect that conversation in a positive way.
And if I can interject, Commissioner Linker, if you in the conversation refer them on, they're usually going to do that because for them the consequence is much more severe. They could possibly be excluded from the adopted list if they break that blackout period and they try to make contact. And so for them, there is a more significant consequence. So if you just immediately nip it, refer it to Dr. Fair, it stops everything.
I think that's right, and depending on where you're at, and if you've got positions in your districts, and they may be working with some of these same publishers to do some of their own local adoptions, that can be a thornier issue. In particular, if you have some responsibilities in your home district, your home school about identifying resources, in particular during this blackout period. We get questions about that from time to time. And so if you have sort of a local question based on sort of the number of hats you wear and some of the circles that you might run in, please let us know how we can assist you with those. Because I know publishers, we get the same kinds of questions every year, and we answer them about as consistently as we can. But certainly they're cognizant of, most of them at least, I'd say just about all of them are very cognizant of the consequences that can be visited upon them if they get too close to the edge. And we find for the most part, I mean, by and large, they're very interested in flying right. So they're interested in getting that guidance so they know where the line is. And so this is just articulating that. Sort of as belt and suspenders here, publishers ought not be providing any undue pressure. If they're providing just regular pressure, I still don't feel good about it, and you should report it. I mean, who's to say what pressure is versus undue pressure? If something wacky comes up, just let us know, and we're gonna address that. I mean, we're gonna have concerns that you felt uncomfortable with an interaction with a publisher, because if you have felt, you are all special people, but if they didn't probably single you out, they're probably doing this with others as well, and the sooner we're in front of that, the sooner we can address it. So any sort of pressure, if you're asking yourself, did they go too far? They probably went too far. So just let us know. And with that undue pressure slide, maybe the pressure's off me unless you all have significant questions about your ethical obligations. Well, I always envy those who get the after lunch ethics slot at trainings. It's a dynamite time to be here. I appreciate your rapt attention. I hope that these are all just minor blips for you. I don't, there will be questions that we receive about blackout periods. In particular, if you're in districts, let us know how we can help you navigate those waters. I think you all are folks who are going to fly right. If you get kinds of requests from others outside this process, sort of outside your circle here that's doing this hard work, that's asking you to do anything administrative with respect to this process, Dr. Fair and I are here to handle that for you. So I thank you for your time, and again, on behalf of the board, thank you for this important work. And I think we will. I don't have the schedule committed to memory, but is it October or that we get that the board will be blessing recommendations?
It's going to be October.
Ooh, maybe it was October. I'm going to leave a stack of cards with Dr. Fair if you need them. I'm happy to answer. You can also find me online. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So as we're the next thing is on the agenda, advisors' interest in recruitment. I'm not gonna get too heavy. Yeah.
Question. It's kind of, this Commissioner Flowers related to what he said about the interaction. And I know in the past, there've been some issues with publishers during the setup time when evaluation week is about to start, and they have a 4-hour window to set up their display for the evaluators to look at the materials. And there are very, very explicit directions given to them ahead of time on how it should be done. And it seems like it never fails that there is one or two that for some reason they didn't get the memo, and some things aren't labeled correctly, and it forces us to get involved to an extent. I was just wondering how that could be fixed once and for all, because it seems to happen every single year.
So Commissioner Licker, I do know that the very specific expectations of that are laid out in not only the invitation, it's also in the publisher's hearing. Questions are submitted in writing, and Dr. Fair responds to questions. And so, yes, it is generally when we have, if it does happen, when we check in publishers, then the general rule is to myself or Dr. Moody, so that we can have a discussion of, here's where it is, and here was the expectations, and yes, it needs to occur, kind of thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
I know it's entirely.
I know we try every year to be a very explicit spelled out, even with samples of what the labels look like and what the display is, and so it's,
And what needs to be.
yeah.
And this is Commissioner Autry, just so that the new people are aware, a specific example, the publishers are supposed to have 2 copies of everything. If they forget to run a second copy, we cannot make a copy for them. It's seen as giving them an advantage, or we're doing something for them. If they're missing a label, we cannot give them a label or relabel anything for them. We cannot offer any support. They need to go to outside of us to help. There was a situation where we wanted more copies of the curriculum guide. And, it would have been beneficial for us to have more than one, but we could not go make more than one because that would have offered an advantage for a publisher. So things like that come up all the time, like Commissioner Flowers was talking about. So just be careful about what is done during those times.
Any other questions? The only time as commissioners that we really come in contact with publishers is at evaluation week, when we're checking them in, and then when they do the presentation. And they're sometimes they're in the hotel the whole time. Sometimes they're just there for setup. They leave, then they come back to break it down later. So the next thing on the agenda is the advisor interest in recruitment. And so we've talked a little bit about advisors and recruitment, so I'm not going to go a lot into it. We will go more into it in the following up meetings. But the things that happen behind the scenes are in the process of happening. And so before the next meeting, we will know how the number of advisors that we need, and it's part of my charge to help figure out who and then I should say the CTE consultants especially are very helpful of, this person is really only qualified to, a masonry teacher is only really qualified to evaluate masonry materials. And so, we're probably only going to get 3 for the state, which means not every district is going to have a masonry person. So it's the logistics of who gets what. And then DPI is also very helpful in advisories they send out through their listservs. Their consultants have teachers that do work and with when they came through this, when they revised the standards, and so they have a pool of people and they have a listserv and they will publish it that way. Then we can also share that information. We'll be making a flyer with a link that there's a process. So when we know how many we need and who we need, then the information will go out to the general public through the listservs, through us, through DPI's different departments, the superintendents, department heads, different people get the listservs, and then we can also reach out. But I will say, when we start looking for the advisors in the different areas, and CTE is different because there are a lot of courses, a lot of different types of teachers that can only do specific areas. And then we also have math, so there'll be certain math teachers. We will probably do it one person per area. For each district would have a ninth grade math teacher who can teach math 1, one who's used to math 2, one math 3, one math 4. So because there's traditionally a lot of materials or more materials to go through. So when that logistical part for advisors comes down, then that will be the next meeting, and then the really nuts and bolts and making sure everything's in place will be that third meeting, the one in April. And a lot of that can be communicated. It can be communicated digitally. It is sharing the numbers and you getting together in your region. And so if you're a region and there's 3 of you together, then y'all might get together and divide up the schools. But it's up to the and I say potential advisors, because they're not hired until after we have this pool of possible candidates. So the advisors apply. There's a pool of possible candidates, and that's when we go through and make sure each region's represented as much as possible, so that it's across the state and it's behind the scenes, just the logistical parts of it that happen. And so that's kind of the advisors. We'll get more into that later. And you've gotten a lot of information today, and I don't want to overwhelm with too much more specifics in that. They just know that we know the areas tentatively. We know the dates. If you know someone who's a really good Math 1 teacher, you could say, hey, if you're not doing anything in July, we're possibly evaluating this summer. Keep your calendar open, more information's coming, kind of thing. Do you have anything to add to that?
This is Commissioner Austin. Math 1 in our district is taught mostly in 8th grade, so it is perfectly fine for us to be reaching out to those people, correct?
That's a really good point.
Same
Yes,
question.
I would think so.
The way it's defined in statute is they just have to be someone who's qualified to teach it, does currently teach it,
Okay.
and would have the licensure to teach it, and is currently teaching it, as much as possible.
This is Commissioner Flowers. I know I worked last year with someone, maybe Stacy, on a recruitment flyer.
Yeah,
or
and
whatever.
we
Is
talked
that
about doing
something
that.
That we wanna do again this year?
Well, we had talked just about doing that for making a flyer, kind of similar like you did before. And also, not only just saying here's the dates, because there is some monetary compensation to be an advisor, but there's also some non-monetary compensations to being an advisor, like being able to meet professional standards as part of their evaluation process, this evaluation tool. And trying to actually highlight, this process will help you document, this standard and how you go above and beyond for this standard, and kind of tying that out also. So it will be, there is some monetary compensation for the advisors, but then there's also some professional.
Remind me what that is again. Is it,
The amount,
yeah.
it's in I think it's 120, 150. What is the compensation for advisor? $120 or
It's 150.
150 per day?
150 time.
Mr. Lambert, I have a question. Did you say they needed to currently be teaching that class?
If possible.
Okay.
Definitely have to have taught it in the past,
Okay.
because you aren't going to be experts in the field.
Exactly.
So like you may be someone who can teach a fashion course, but if you haven't actually taught a fashion course, is that the expertise lens you want them to look through, is someone who's very familiar with the blueprint?
Or like, well, I mean, you could use fashion, you could use like math. Maybe you're not teaching Math 1 this year, but you taught it last year, and you're probably gonna teach it again the following year. Like, cause some of those are, you may not have a fashion course meet this year, but you've taught it in the past and you're gonna teach it again. Yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind with advisors is they need the experience. Sometimes we can ask them we may ask them, yes, we know that you teach Math 1 now and you prefer to do Math 1, but if I don't have an opening for you in Math 1, are you interested and qualified for Math 2? as well. And then the other thing, just to make sure that the impression's not given that because you're talking to them, they are gonna be an advisor. We refer to them as potential advisors. We're trying to get a pool of potential advisors. I think that's kind of the it for the advisor part is they need to be qualified, they need to be experts. So the next part is the subcommittee update, which we've already done. So then that gets us to,
So, I'm sorry, I kind of lost a little bit. Commissioner Flowers mentioned about the flower, we are gonna do that
yes, we are
again.
gonna do the
I
flowers.
was really mainly asking, was that solidified, who was doing it? Or
I
was
think,
I'm
I
doing
think,
it?
I think you and I were gonna do it because we were gonna put it up in the form. And
Okay. Just check.
now, if
double
anybody
check.
wants to help,
Yes, please.
I would just add that when you all get ready to do that, what I normally do, before that's created, is I work with the content experts here at DPI, whatever the areas are, and find out from them, like, are there specific requirements that the teachers in these areas have to have? And then they provide that language, and we normally put that in the recruitment flyer. And I also included on the application piece, there would be a question that would ask them, are they certified or whatever the qualification would be. I ask that in the application so that they can check that to indicate that they are. And then that helps with you all when you're looking and trying to make decisions about who would be best qualified. Then you have it right there in that spreadsheet. So I will be doing that. We had a meeting already, but I have to reach back out to them to get those details. So as soon as I get those, I will let you know. And Commissioner Flowers, you're saying you're gonna be working on that again
We
this
can
year?
just.
yeah.
Okay.
And if anyone else, because I think it was you and Commissioner Wood who resigned, that you worked on, if anybody else is interested in working with Commissioner Flowers, feel free. You're more than welcome. If anybody else has an interest, just if you'll let her know and y'all can work out the details. We kind of brainstormed some of the professional standards that we wanted to highlight also as a reference tool to get some more interest. And so that gets us to the reimbursement procedures, which we've already done the paperwork.
I think, does anybody have any questions about reimbursement?
Rick was gonna come in at 2:00 to
Okay.
explain his documentation process to everyone. So if we
Okay,
have.
then I'll go to we're gonna go to the next section, okay? The next section is the invitation and sample sites. So you have the copy of the invitation. And all the information about advisors and the rate of pay and all that's also spelled out, I'm pretty sure it's in the invitation,
The rate of pay for the advisors is in policy.
is in policy. As well as, there's other things depending on how close you are to the site, if you get, accommodations or you don't, you get mileage. If you're living within 30 miles, is it, Dr.? If you live within 35 miles of the evaluation site, you would only get your per diem and then mileage. You wouldn't get meals, you wouldn't get any of that. And the logistics of all that, DPI handles the reservations for the advisors and the reimbursements, and that's all part of that. But as you talk to people about it, there is a per diem, but as far as if you stay on site or if you travel back and forth, all that has to do with where they live in distance to the site. Sample sites. The sample sites, so that's where your personal set of whatever the publishers submit or deliver. Excuse me. And that was hit a little bit on in the presentation from Commissioners Jimenez and Seiss. But I can't tell you what that'll look like because it hasn't been submitted yet. But it is potentially quite a few CTE courses. Traditionally, CTE courses aren't as much materials because they seem to be modules, more module. Sometimes that is video, sometimes it's links to video, so it wouldn't be actual tangible things. And then it's math, ninth through 12th grade math. So the, you need to find a location where these materials will be delivered. They will come in a big truck, like a shipping truck. I mean, it could be a couple of FedEx deliveries, but I mean, it's not going to be, here's a little box. It's going to be a lot of stuff possibly. So you're going to need to find somewhere that needs to be, that you want that sent, which Dr. Fair needs by our next meeting, before our next meeting, no later than our next meeting. The sooner the better, because she has to provide that information to the publishers, and the publishers' hearing is it's before our next meeting.
I'll
Yes.
also add that what I normally do so that I can gather that information is I do a Google form, and then I send you the information for the form so that you can complete it, and then once it's done, it becomes the actual list, because that list does have to be shared with the publishers so that they know where to send everything. So that'll be in the form of a Google form with the deadline in the email.
So along with the site, there's things you need to keep in mind. Like, for instance, they can deliver anywhere from 8 to 5. So it needs to be somewhere there's somebody there to accept the delivery. That they will deliver it to your site, like to the door. But they might or may not take it into the building. It depends on, that's up to the shipment. Like, they're to get it there, but they don't have to like put it where you want them to put it, kind of thing. So, some suggestions of places. Some teachers have arranged for their district to have it at a site, either their school or a central school. In the past, we had it at our warehouse in our district. I was able to put it at the warehouse one year. Years ago, when I first started, it was an empty mobile unit. We don't really have those anymore, but it was at a school that was near my house, and the principal was okay with me coming onto the building after hours, because you're going to have to be able to have access to this material. Does that make sense? So, like, if the material comes and it's in a school and it's inside the school and the school closes at 4 and you need to come in on a Saturday, if you don't have access to that on a Saturday at 4, it's going to make it harder for you to get to the material. So, things to keep in mind. Currently, I have mine delivered to Pfeiffer University. It's been a really nice relationship for the last 6 or 7 years. Dr. Moody's was Catawba College. It's going to be Livingston, I think, this year, because they're doing some renovation work at Catawba. So we have universities that have teaching departments, and then when we finish our process and we make our recommendation, then those materials just go into their teacher collection for teachers.
It's really the nicest way, if you've got a university that has a teacher
So,
education program near you, because they can keep it and you don't have to clean it all up, and you usually have access to it.
It was also up to you to dispose of it when the process is over.
Right.
And that's when you get into some of the things that she talked about, of you can't sell it, you can't break copyright infringements, you can't keep that publisher from.
You can't use it in your classroom,
Right.
like your personal gain.
It
So,
it
or
can't
your
be
school
something
district's
that,
gain, you know.
and so that's a good way to do it, is to say, here, if you have a local college or someone that could use it. A lot of community colleges have CTE courses, so you might be able to do that with them as they're training students on how to do that. But if you need any suggestions or ideas, you can reach out and ask. We've had people that have it delivered to their house. If you do a storage unit, it's up to, you're gonna have to pay for the storage unit, so kind of keep that in mind. So wherever it is, you're gonna have to pay for the storage if it's not somewhere that you don't have to pay for the storage.
Commissioner Perry, I have a question. With CTE, would it be in, like a broad area? Especially in our rural areas, we don't have teachers that are trained in certain curriculums like plumbing and welding. Our teachers don't teach it at the high school. Our students go to our local community college. Like Saints Community College is building a couple $1 million facility right now. Would those people be qualified to come? I know they teach at a community
talking about
college.
advisors now? Because we were talking about
Yes.
materials. Okay.
I'm sorry, I was thinking about materials as I was thinking about advisors, because it just made me think it all kind of goes together.
Dr. Fair, but you please correct me if I'm saying this wrong. many of the professors at the community college are teaching dual enrollment courses, like our high school students are taking them, they're dual enrollment. It looks like to me that they would be excellent advisors, just like our high school teachers. They're teaching our high school students, and they're using our high school curriculum, or we've aligned our college and high school curriculum to be college and career promise. So I can't imagine that there would be a difference in that, would there?
You can make that call if
Yeah.
you all feel that they would be.
I think that they would, as long as they are serving in a dual enrollment way. Like if they're just teaching welding and none of our high school students take welding, I wouldn't pick them, but if our students, some of our high school students take welding and it's a community college teacher and they're willing to do it, I think that's, we have to think more broadly. And the end game is who is the expert who could most advise us. And they would certainly be sitting in that seat. So that's a great question with CTE.
Thank you about that. Again, Commissioner Perry. And I know we've left the advisor area, but as I was scrolling through our invite information, I was determining who would be teaching this, because I have a lot of connections in surrounding areas, because I've been teaching CTE for such a long time. And I'm thinking there's nobody high school. And then, but again, like a plumber, you just don't have plumbing in high school. That's what we got to make sure we all understand when you're talking and connecting with people, where this is going to.
And you're not limited just to your community, your
Different
networks
counties.
throughout the state, and other teachers that you would know. And so you could reach down into the 8th grade, or you could reach above, as long as they are teaching the curriculum.
That's
the
what I was
question.
saying.
Like, we don't, we just don't want them not teaching the curriculum. And the other thing is, often you may not think about this, but you should. You may know people in charter schools, so we certainly want to involve more people to be advisors. So think about charter schools in your area that may have some expertise in that, as well as private schools. So it's the curriculum that we want to be sure.
And which your thought made me think also to keep in mind with advisors, when we go to look for advisors, they do need to represent the state. So it's really hard to say, like for instance, our region, there's 6 of us. So like we're not each gonna have more than one person from our region, because then that makes too many advisors from our region, and they're not from other parts of the state aren't represented. Now, it's good to have backup. It's always good to have the second. We went through the 3rd round, I think, last year, trying to find some holes. Fill some holes, especially for some EC and ELL advisors. So it's okay to have them on the list, but just know, like, if I teach at my school and I have some awesome teachers in my school and I know that they could teach it, I can't hire or recommend 4 teachers from my school. Does that make sense? So we need to make sure that even though we're in the region, there's more than our specific our specific school system in that region. And while Dr. Moody and I both are in the same school system, last year I didn't choose anybody in our school system because it wouldn't be equitable for everybody else. Does that make sense? So it's good to have the pool. Remember, we talk about it being a potential because it's a pool of people. But when it comes down to who's picked, that plays into it. That we have charter school representation. I mean, we look specifically, are we meeting across the state? Are we hitting different school regions as much as possible? Are we hitting some charter schools? And so all of that and ultimately plays into who is chosen or asked to be the advisor. But the idea is if we get a really good and rich pool of people to pull from, and sometimes we have to go back around because emergencies come up and someone has an emergency and they can't do it, and we have this backup list and we can call and say, hey, can you still do it? So it's good to have more people in the pool, but just as long as you realize as a commissioner, you're not going to have 6 people from your school district.
Commissioner Perry speaking again. Like in the state, I know there's only 7 high schools in the whole entire state that takes auto techs. Although auto tech is not part of CTE this time, would we be able to get a list of teachers from the CTE DPI to see who teaches plumbing or
Yes.
HVAC?
Yes.
Thank you.
And they are willing, the regional consultants for DPI and CTE have already, indicated that they would be willing to help us in the specific areas if we were having trouble finding.
Thank you.
And again, sending it hopefully through the listserv would let even other people have the opportunity. Because we definitely don't want to limit the availability of people to know. The more the people that know that can apply or express interest, the broader the pool, the better off we all are in the end. And so that's, so back to the sample sites. So just kind of keep those kind of logistical things in mind. I know last year a new commissioner, year before last, didn't really anticipate the tractor trailers that would be coming, and she wasn't home, and so they left. There was no way to leave the materials. It is our charge. We are required to accept the materials. It's part of the process. If you don't have the materials, how are you gonna put your eyes on the materials? So, just be thinking of places and have that date and that location and a contact person and a number for after hours, all that information Dr. Farrell have, all that needs to be provided to her so that she can provide it to the publisher so then they can get the sample materials out.
This is Carmela Fair. I would also say that what you mentioned earlier about your time restraints, about when someone is going to be available to accept, you should also include that there'll be a place in the form for you to indicate any special instructions. Please, please, please be sure to include any special instructions there so that they are aware that it might just be, Monday through Thursday. Because I think some schools ran into that because of scheduling during the summer and things like that. So that's the kind of stuff that we need to know so that they can properly plan when and how they're going to ship things and when they're going to arrive.
Commissioner Sykes, I just want to speak on that real quick, but that's not a guarantee, because I had it on mine that it couldn't come until after 1 p.m. And I had them literally drop a pallet in the middle of my driveway at 7 o'clock in the morning and leave. And then it started to rain. So luckily it was covered in plastic, but that left me and my 13-year-old niece. I had to leave work to come and help her move 300 boxes into the garage. So just be prepared for...
Right, and if something like that happens, you should definitely let me know, because that's something that we should definitely try to address.
Yeah.
Because we do go through the issue of making sure that we provide as much information as we can about the delivery specifics, and that information is noted in the invitation. They receive the information, the sample size, and so we definitely want them to adhere to that. Last year, some things did come up where, because of locations where some of the publishers were, their materials were shipped, but there was a delay in them getting to where they needed to get to. But they contact us about things like that. So sometimes we find out through them if there's been an issue with the time frame. But if you know one, definitely let us know so that we can make sure that we reach out if we need to, so it doesn't happen.
So, Commissioner Linker, one more thing, and I was going to do is closing, but since we've talked about emails and how you send an email, and I feel like it's important that to state, and I don't think it's a problem. It's just being transparent and being. In the past, we've had problems with quick responses, and in some cases, no responses to emails. So if you get an email from Dr. Fair, it is important. She's on a timeline and she is requiring specific information, and so it is on us to respond to her, even if it's a "Hey, I'm working on it" kind of response. But there have been instances that she's gotten no response. Sometimes when we had meetings and we didn't know if we had quorum because people weren't responding to the Google form. So you'll get Google forms. You'll get, are you coming to the meeting? Are you going to need reservations? Because she's got to do logistics before we get here. As far as, who needs a sub, I need to have that form for that person, that sort of stuff. So, I would say if you see you have an email from Dr. Fair, which would come from DPI, sometimes she sends it through the list, what do you call their, it's not like from her personally, it might say North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. You know, so it's like a blind email, so you can't see everybody's email addresses, sort of thing. And so sometimes it's from her, and sometimes it's from NCDPI. Just make sure that if you see something from her, if you see something from Dr. Moody or myself, it's sometimes I'm just helpful. So I'm like, if you're coming in, here's some hotels you can look at. You know, it's okay if you don't respond to that, but if you get something from Dr. Fair, it really needs to be as quick as possible response. If she sends us a Google form to fill out, and she says you need to have it filled out by 5 o'clock on this date, at 5 o'clock on that date, that form closes.
This just kind of goes back to dates and trying to make arrangements for so many people. The promptness of that matters because we move on. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, that doesn't really work. Like, that would have been nice to have known 2 weeks ago when we're scheduling it. So
I thought that was a good time to make that reminder, to make sure that we're mindful of everyone's time and that we're responding to that. The other thing I have is the invitation, and a lot of what's in the invitation we've already gone through. It is a 111-page document. If you look in the table of contents, you can even kind of see, you know, some pages are general statutes, again, that we've gone over in multiple ways today. There's board policy. There's information about publishers, specific about procurement procedures and bid procedures. And then the reason that it's 111 pages is because examples of all the criteria sheets. So you hear us talk about criteria sheets, the criteria sheets that have already been developed, and they are in that document, the samples of the bid sheets, the criteria sheets. And then the appendices in the end of the document, you'll see we referred to earlier about publishers having things labeled. There's a picture of the label and what it should be in it, and there's information to the publishers about sample materials and how they should be delivered and when they should be delivered. And so back and around through the invitation as a means to get to when we get our samples, all the stuff needs to be checked in. We need to let Dr. Fair know if there's not something there. We did have had problems in the past with things missing, and if it's not there for us, if we don't get it in our samples, then it can't be at the evaluation site. So like if I don't get a book in my sample, if it gets left out of my shipment and we don't have that book, they can't leave that book at evaluation week. And so we need to know so that we can let Dr. Fair know if there's a problem, so then she's the one who contacts if she needs to contact. Sometimes the responsibility is on the publishers and the accountability is on the publishers to provide that, but she needs to know if we don't have it, because if we don't have it, that could affect some of the policies and procedures and guidelines for the publishers through the e-procurement process. So again, when those materials come in, they need to be signed. In your presentation, Jimenez and Seiss, you guys had like something that said if it didn't have sometimes you have an envelope. Is that in there yours? So you may have an envelope in addition to boxes, because the envelope will be where your digital codes are. And sometimes the envelope will be where your correlation is. There's something called a correlation. And so it may not be in a box. You may have 25 boxes and one box might have the check-in information, but you will have the bid sheet, what was submitted, and that's what you will use to check in to make sure everything that they have proposed, you check to see that you've got. And then if you do not receive it, then we just let Dr. Fair know what's missing. But the key thing is that not everything are in the boxes. Sometimes the codes for access to digital components are in a separate envelope. Actually, I think they're supposed to be in a separate envelope. It's spelled out that they need to be in a separate envelope. So if you have any questions as you guys look through the invitation, because it is a lot to look through, just, again, reach out or be ready when we meet next time to ask questions. And we'll be glad to help you with it.
Many of you have already started this is Carmela Fair. Many of you have already started on your reimbursement documents. And I mentioned Rick Klein earlier would be the person from our staff who's working on getting the information typed in and turned in and everything. So he's here and he will definitely, work with those of you who are new, who may have questions about the reimbursement process and the paperwork. So he'll be over in the lounge area, and you can go over there, as your meeting concludes, and he'll be happy to help you with that. Are there any general questions from any of the returning members about anything, that he can answer quickly?
Sorry, just real quick, Commissioner Seiss. For travel, do we fill anything in as far as where we're coming from and going to on this form?
On the cheat sheet, that's where I would need to know. Some of this might be duplicate, but it helps me fill out. Where it says on the
This is the one he's talking about. That's the cheat sheet, right?
cheat sheet.
That's where you're filling in your
Like, we
information.
put what time we leave,
Highlighted, which is not highlighted.
Right, but I'm saying, it doesn't ask, like,
what time I think we'll arrive back.
I guess the question is, do we still get paid for travel? Because it's not asking,
It's on the others.
no, this just asks if we spent the
So
night.
I penciled mine in. In the directions for the cheat sheet, it said to put the time you left and the time that you
That's
returned,
only
but
if you're a
there's nowhere
commuter.
on the cheat sheet to put it, so I just wrote mine on the side in the whites
Because
margin.
this is not even a quarter time that I help out here, so.
Yeah.
This is just borrowed from the previous person who helped me out. So, yes, where you have your name and address, that's what I would use when I do the MapQuest. or
Okay,
Google Maps.
okay, so we don't have to provide you with that this time.
Well, I do need to know the address.
Right.
That's what helps me out. And as far as the time, like if you stayed at the hotel, for instance, a lot of times it'll have your check-in, which I could use that, and then I can see where you're from, and I could back time it and say, oh, she took about 3 hours.
Well, the difference is there's 4 of us that actually came in yesterday morning at 7:30. We left our homes at 7:30 because we
Okay.
met yesterday morning and said that for the 4 of us that we were here all day yesterday.
Right,
But
So
you didn't check
you
in
need-
till
but-
4.
Yeah, so we did, but we didn't check into the hotel till 4.
okay.
So we need
But
to
I
make
do
sure
have- I
that
do
we
have
write
the
on
names
it.
of the folks who were here on the 22nd.
Well, we didn't stay, we didn't spend the night that first night.
They spent the night last night.
We only spent last night.
The evening of the 22nd.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't spend the night before, we just got up early and drove in yesterday morning. Yesterday morning, yeah.
Right, yeah, so just put, the hotel then would be the one for the 27th.
Right, but you wanted to know the time that we left, the 4 of us left for
you can
lunch
just-
reimbursement
Yeah, you
purposes.
can just write that.
Okay, so just on the side, on that, on the,
You'd be eligible,
Yeah.
whatever that says, as you said.
yeah, right, okay. So that would just be the 4 of us that came in early, make sure that you put, like, where you put the hotel, just on the side, put left, the date, the time we left home yesterday morning.
Commissioner Coggins, if we're going to be mailing in our parking stub, we just mail the other documents at the same time, or do you want those now?
I would, did you already submit or turn in a W-9, or do you have one? Are you a current member?
I was a member last year, yes.
Good, then we still have your W-9, as long as you haven't moved or anything.
Yeah.
That's fine. I go ahead and complete everything, because I can work on everybody's travel, and then as your travel, or as your parking comes in, make sure you write your name on the parking
Perfect.
receipt. Then I will release it with that. I make a copy of everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did.
So you sending.
No, no.
Okay.
And he'll, how many people call him, sometimes just the 4 of us can yesterday morning at 7:30.
Like not knowing. So y'all should get.
And see, what you do, sort of just
Yesterday morning, I did for 6, you have to
Park before 6 a.m. Oh, I didn't see that.
what about your parking receipt?
Put all my stuff together.
Let's,
See you in a month.
take this right now.
What you need, right?
This
Media.
is really, it's supposed to be a parking receipt for today. What are these?
That was my vacation day.
Did you already get your parking receipt? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I see what you're saying.
I know Walter Johnson.
That's
Sure.
fine. I see what you're saying. That's fine. Okay, so you're gonna just send me one receipt?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right. Oh, what about your parking receipt?
It's all in there.
For today? How'd you manage that?
It doesn't tell me.
I was gonna say, there's a little lot that gives you. Yep.
That's what I do.
That's that way I'll mail anything in.
There, you give them nothing.
I do too, it's so cute. And it's easy in and out.
That's right.
Okay, so,
Just be sure that you write something hearted.
Right there, like, there's a spot that was by itself. It would have fit perfectly there.
Let's see what you
Two spots where when you pull in, you just pull straight in, and then you pull straight out. Not gonna do that now.
We're not
Oh, yes, thank you.
right.
Take that too when I drive Patrick's truck.
Do what?
Is that right? All right, yeah, because that's basically your parking receipt.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it.
We'll just say like, what time did you do your best guess?
What time did I?
Your home.
What time?
Yeah, you can see that one.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So if everyone's finished with the questions, if you can return to your seats, because we have to officially close the meeting and have a motion to adjourn and a vote to adjourn and all the wonderful formalities of a public meeting according to Robert's rules.
Unless you.
What'd you say?
But we need to have an official closing.
Okay, I'm sorry, is there any further business today? Do I have a motion, Commissioner Austin?
Commissioner Austin makes a motion that be adjourned.
Do I have a s- we have a motion and a second. All of those in favor, raise your right hand. You are officially adjourned. Thank you for your first day.
So what's the mileage?
I probably didn't say, but you're never